Hello and welcome to Legislative Report. I'm State Representative Jason Ortitay of the 46th District in Allegheny and Washington counties. On today's program, I thought we would take a moment to explain how an idea becomes a bill and then finds its way to the governor to be signed into law. Joining me today to explain the process is Representative Bryan Cutler, Majority Whip of the State House of Representatives. Rep. Cutler, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me.
I'm glad you're here. I know I get a lot of questions back home about what it takes to get an idea to a committee, through the House, through the Senate, and to the governor's desk to be signed eventually into law. And I was hoping you could explain the process from beginning to end of how this process works.
Sure. On the surface, it sounds very simple. And I'm sure, though, that as you've been here for some time, you quickly recognize how complicated it can become. On the very cursory level, you have an idea. That idea is then put in the draft form. We introduce that into one of the chambers, either the House or the Senate, and then it will go through the committee process and then out to a floor for eventual vote, and then go to the other chamber. Assuming that it's successful there, it would then go to the governor's desk.
Now, anybody can propose an idea to put it in. Basically, they would take it, they propose the actual legislation, and then it would be sent. I believe the majority leader determines which committee it goes into. Could you talk a little bit about the committee process that we have and how the bill actually gets put into the committee and then gets voted back out?
Sure. When you have the draft bill, and this is one of the things that I think that we here in the Capitol, we kind of lose sight of. We're not very creative in terms of what we call things. Like we literally take paper copies of the bill down, as you know, down, and we timestamp them in the table, which is the location that accepts the bills. They are then read across by the speaker, and then they're assigned to a committee, what we would call the Committee of Jurisdiction.
Right. In
terms of, if it's an ag-related bill, it would go to the Agricultural and Rural Affairs Committee, or if it's a criminal code, it would go to the Judicial Committee. And from there, the committee chooses to either take the bill up for consideration, maybe an amendment, and then it would come back out to the floor. From there, it would, assuming that it is amended and moving through the process, or it successfully is moved on to the next section, it would then go to the Appropriations Committee, where they would do a financial impact of the bill. In other words, what will it cost the Commonwealth if this should become law? And then it would come back out for a final vote in the House. But the beautiful thing is we as individual members, regardless of our current positions, we all have the ability both to introduce bills as well as amendments on other bills.
So once it leaves the House, we sign off on it, goes over to the Senate. The Senate takes a look at it, goes through the same exact process over there, just with less people. And then what happens after that? Let's say the Senate approves it, but they alter it. Does it come back to the House, or does it go to the governor?
That's a great question. Anytime that a bill is changed, after it leaves the first chamber, it will then go back to the originating chamber. In this example, it would be the House, and it is voted on in what we call concurrence. In other words, do we agree with the amendments that the Senate put in, or do we not agree? And if we agree, we vote that, and then it would then go to the governor's desk. If we disagree, it would then go to what we call a conference committee. We would have appointed members from both the House and the Senate to work out a compromise.
Okay, now let's say the bill goes to the governor. What options does the governor actually have when the bill's put on his desk?
Well, as we've recently seen with many of the legislative priorities we put on the governor's desk, he can choose to use a veto, but he can also choose to sign it. Those are the easiest two choices, either sign it or veto it. In the case of some bills, such as the appropriations bill and appropriation-related bills, there is the ability to line item veto certain lines. In other words, let's say we thought a program should have $1 million in it, but he thinks it should only be $750,000. He can reduce that expenditure down to that amount with his line item veto power. Or, as was the case recently with the budget, he can choose to zero out entire line items. And that is essentially a legislative authority of the governor. It's very limited and constitutionally defined. But then the third option is he could actually just allow things to become law by not acting on it, by not vetoing it, and not line item vetoing it. If after 10 days nothing has happened, it is assumed to be law, and then it has the effect of law.
Well, there we have it. That's basically how a bill becomes law after weeks, sometimes months, even it could be years, pretty much. We've seen a lot of bills go through the process that go from session to session that
Well, and that's actually a very interesting point. I'm in the middle of my 5th term, and I can say I feel very blessed to have some legislative success. I've had 4 bills signed into law by 2 different governors, and they weren't always the easiest issues. We dealt with hospital licensing issues, which they had tried to do for 30 years, and we had done another one that dealt with welfare reform. The reason I bring both of those up is because of all the bills I've had signed, every single one of them went over more than one session as we worked on compromise, as we worked on the language. And that is part of the process, and I do understand that, I, like the voters, and I'm sure yourself, get very frustrated with how long it takes to change even what we think is common sense things. But the reality is we have to convince 102 members in the House, 26 in the Senate, and then hopefully the governor's signature.
It's not as always easy as it sounds and how it looks on paper. But hey, that's all the time we have for today's program. I'm State Representative Jason Ortitay. If you need any assistance with any state government matter, please feel free to contact me at my local office. The address and number will be shown in just a moment. Thanks for watching me, and please join me next time on Legislative Report.